All right, call this as a temporary chair, hopefully very temporary chair, one meeting. And I'll call this meeting to order. Number one on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the June 17th, 2021 meeting. What's the board, the committee's pleasure?
I'll make it a motion to approve.
I have a motion and a second.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Unfinished business. We'll start with A on the agenda, review of Board of Appeals bylaws, definition of a quorum. Bruce, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to start out with thanking you for being on the board. And if you haven't heard, I announced my retirement from the city of Fargo. So just going to let you know, I'll probably bring it up at every meeting when everyone's here too. So I'll be leaving September 3rd. In regards to the quorum, we received communication from our city attorney that our definition of quorum didn't exactly match the state law. So we're going to do that. We're going to bring in the state law definition. And our current reads, quorum shall consist of 4 members. State law reads, quorum means 1/2 or more of the members of the governing body, or any smaller number sufficient for governing body to transact business on behalf of the public entity. Their definition is so loose, it actually allows us to do anything. We're going to request that you motion to accept the state definition of the quorum. We're going to attempt to still have 4 members for any code adoptions or appeals, because we think we should have 4 of 6 to do the action. But if we need to, we can go with 3. If needed, we could even go with 2 by this definition. So it's going to depend upon the agenda and what's on there, how we look at that. So we'd like you to make that motion to adopt. It's listed on your second page of your agenda.
I'll make that motion to adopt the Century Code definition of a quorum. Do I need to read it, or should I?
No, you can say as stated in the.
Yeah, as
agenda.
outlined in the memorandum from the Fargo Inspections Office.
So motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion, further discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We're lightning fast here today already.
You're doing such a great job.
Yeah, thanks.
I think we should make it permanent.
There won't be a motion for that, I don't think. All right, item B on the agenda, reviewing whether or not to continue our August 12th meeting or postpone it. Chris, is that your item? I think on our schedule that was listed as a fire code meeting, and we just received the fire code code book, IFC. Chris?
Correct. Good morning. Chris Rose, Assistant Director. You did just receive the fire code today, which is why the recommended motion is to postpone and completely cancel the 12th meeting until later in the schedule.
We don't need a motion for that, do we?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We'll just take it off, cancel it off our calendars.
And we can ask
Wait.
Gretchen to update the website.
Do you know when the meeting might occur on the fire code, or we'll just deal with that in later meetings?
We did decide, and I can't remember, I think it was September.
Okay.
We can send an email with the updated agenda.
No, that's fine. All right, everybody in agreement? Postpone, cancel that meeting, and Chris, you may as well stay up and talk about item C.
I will. It's really short and sweet.
All right.
There were just 2 updates. We misspoke at the last meeting. Section 903.272 is the size requirement for fire area when it's within an M occupancy. We said 2,500, and the real number is when it exceeds 5,000. And the other update was we misspoke on one of the section numbers from the code. We said the code section was 905.3.1 and it's really 905.311. So it's just two, because we caught them, I thought they're minor changes, but we might as well mention it. Especially the 5,000 square foot one, that one's kind of a bigger deal. But that's it. It was just two amendments to the last chapter 9.
Could you explain what the 5,000 square foot is about?
For the fire area, we said last time that once the group M occupancy exceeds 2,500, you had to have the sprinkler system, but it's not correct. The correct number is 5,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any questions, concerns?
Thanks.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to new business. Looks like item A, review of the International Building Code, chapters 16 through 23. Justin, you're going to present those, huh?
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Justin Shamer with Sandman Structural Engineers. I will be presenting the significant changes to the chapters 16 through 23 of the International Building Code. Once again, there's nothing really major that changed in these codes, but I'll briefly go through some of these more minor ones and stop me if you have any questions. Section 1601.1, I recommend keeping the existing amendment, which requires a structural engineer to determine engineering requirements of this code. The next change, table 1604.5, when it comes to risk categories, this modification provides new occupancy rules to risk category 3 that clarifies structures with public assembly spaces and structures containing group E or group I4 occupancies. Section 1605.1, this modification specifies that for allowable stress design load combinations, when crane hook loads are present, they do not need to be combined with roof live loads or more than 3/4 snow load or half of the wind loads. 1606.3, this addition specifies provisions that the weight of fixed service equipment should be included in the dead load, but not to counteract overturning, sliding, and uplift. This addition also includes exceptions to the provisions. 1606.4, this addition clarifies that solar panel systems and their ballast shall be considered dead load. In the past, it was kind of questionable what type of loading that was, and they clarified that in this section. 1606.5, this addition specifies that landscaped roofs shall be considered as dead loads. The soil should be considered as saturated or dry to achieve the most severe loads. Table 1607.1, this modification clarifies the uniform live load for bleacher type seating, stadiums with fixed seats, fixed ladders, passenger vehicles, garages, roof live loads used for occupied roofs and storage areas above ceilings. 1607.7, this addition specifies the uniform design loads and concentrated loads for passenger vehicles and parking structures found in table 1607.1. 3,000 pounds, an area of 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches for vehicles with 9 or less passengers, and 2,250 pounds per wheel for mechanical structures without slab or deck. Section 1607.17, this addition specifies the concentrated load of 300 pounds on the rungs and 100 pounds rails extended above the floor of ladders fixed to a structure. This was always in the ASC 7. They just brought it into the IBC just because not all codes were referencing the ASC 7. 1607.18, library stack rooms. This edition specifies that bookshelves in libraries cannot exceed 90 inches tall and 12 inches deep from each face, as well as a 36-inch aisle between parallel rows of shelves. 1607.19, this edition specifies the design loads for bleacher type seating in the ICC 300 and the horizontal sway loads of 24 pounds per linear foot parallel to each row and 10 pounds per linear foot perpendicular to each row. 1607.20, this edition specifies that uniform loads should be taken according to table 1607.1 and concentrated loads should be applied to an area of 4.5 inches by 4.5 inches. 1607.21, this edition specifies that the concentrated load on a stair tread should be applied to an area of 2 inches by 2 inches. 1607.22, residential attics, this edition specifies that uninhabitable attics without storage, the live load from table 1607.1 does not need to be applied concurrently with other live loads. This edition also specifies for uninhabitable attics with storage that in certain cases a live load from the same table should be applied no less than 10 pounds per square foot. If there are stairs to the attic, they should be designed to the minimum live load specified for habitable attics and sleeping rooms. 1610.1, I recommend keeping the existing amendment, which allows the maximum height for basement walls to be designed for active pressure to be 9 feet instead of 8 feet. 1610.2, this edition specifies that basements, floors, slabs on grades, foundations, and similar elements below grade need to be designed to resist uplift from the hydrostatic load under the element. 1612, flood loads, I recommend keeping the existing amendment, which deletes this section because it's addressed in the City of Fargo flood requirements. Chapter 17, table 1705.6. This addition to the table specifies that special inspectors shall inspect installation tolerances of precast concrete diaphragm connections per compliance with ACI 550.5. 1705.5.3, mass timber construction. This addition provides a table for the special inspections needed for mass timber construction, including inspection of anchorage and connections of mass timber construction to timber deep foundation systems, inspection of mass timber construction and inspection of connections where installation methods are required to meet design loads. 1705.10, this edition states that whenever there's a doubt of the structural integrity of a deep foundation, there needs to be an engineering assessment that is performed in accordance with ASTM requirements. 1705.18, this modification now makes it required to have special inspections on fire stops and fire resistant joints for group R occupancies with the occupant load greater than 250. For this one, Bruce, is this do fire stops and fire resistant joints currently get inspected?
Which one?
For on 1705.18.
518.
1705.18. It's just saying for group R occupancies, when occupant load is greater than 250, then you need to do special inspections on the fire joints. I guess maybe a group R occupancy. I mean, that's Brian, Kevin, is that like an apartment building is group R?
Yeah.
But are those usually under 250 most of the time, or what's a common occupancy of one of those buildings?
Well, residential is now 200 square foot per person. And, so 2,500 occupant load times 200, that's the requirement.
Okay.
In group R, it talks about all group R, so it's apartments, hotels, everything like that.
Okay. So this would only apply if it was maybe a pretty large building this would affect. I just want to make sure to point that out if it was something that affected a lot of the apartments or the things that are being built in town. But if it's a pretty big building, I think it would need to be for 250 occupancy.
250 times 200, 50,000. I mean, if it's 10,000 per floor, it's 5 floors. It's a pretty good size building.
Yeah. Okay. All right, moving on. 1705.20, sealing of mass timber. This edition requires periodical special inspections of sealant or adhesives applied to mass timber building elements. 1709.5.2.1, this edition specifies that garage doors and rolling doors are to be tested with either ASTM or ANSI/DSMA requirements and should be labeled with the manufacturer, model number, wind pressure rating, installation instruction, drawing reference number, and the applicable testing standard. Moving on to chapter 18, 1804.4. I recommend keeping the existing amendment that addresses surface drainage and accounting for settlement at door landings and ramps. 1804.5, I recommend keeping the existing amendment, which deletes this section because it stressed the city of Fargo flood requirements. Same goes for 1805.1.2.1. 1807.2.4, segmented retaining walls. This edition specifies that dry cast concrete units used for segmental retaining walls shall comply with ASTM C1372. Section 1809.5, I recommend keeping the existing amendment, which adds an exception for Group U occupancy buildings to not require a frost-protected foundation. 1809.5.1, frost protection at required exits. This edition specifies that at exterior landings with outward swinging doors, there needs to be frost protection to the extent to ensure unobstructed opening of the doors. 1810.3.1, allowable axial load. This modification provides an exception that allowable axial and lateral loads on deep foundations do not need to be determined through load testing when approved by the building official. 1810.4.5, vibratory driving. This modification changes the list of exceptions to vibratory driving to include the pile installation is completed by driving with an impact hammer, or the pile is to be used for lateral resistance. Moving on to chapter 19. 1901.7, tolerances for structural concrete. This edition specifies the tolerance for structural concrete if they are not indicated on construction documents. Cast in place concrete should comply with ACI 117 and precast concrete should comply with ACI ITG-7. 1906.1, plain concrete footings. This edition states that for group R3 occupancies or other occupancies less than 2 stories above the plane of light frame construction, requires that plain concrete footings be permitted to be 6 inches if the footing does not extend more than 4 inches on either side of the supported wall. Chapter 20 does not have any significant changes. Chapter 21, 2107.3. This modification changes modification of TMS 401, section 6.1.6.1 to state that the welding shall conform to AWS and welded splices should be ASTM A706 steel. Any reinforcement larger than number 9 should be spliced by mechanical connections. 2109.2.4.8, exterior finish. This modification provides requirements for what kind of exterior finish can be applied to adobe masonry walls. No significant changes in chapters 22. And last chapter, 23. 2303.2.3, this edition specifies that wood structural panels need to be tested with a longitudinal gap of 1/8 of an inch. Figure 2303.4.1.2, 1 through 5, there is an addition of 5 figures that provides diagrams of buckling reinforcement when it comes to trusses. 2303.4.1.2.1, trusses installed without a diaphragm. This edition specifies that trusses installed without a diaphragm require project-specific permanent individual truss member restraint and permanent individual truss member diagonal bracing prepared by registered design professional. 2304.9, lumber decking. This edition allows for other lumber decking patterns and connections not specified should be substantiated through engineering analysis. 2304.10.1, connection fire resistant rating. This edition provides methods for fire resistant ratings for type 4A, type 4B, or type 4C construction. Table 2304.10.2, this modification provides additional quantity and types of fasteners along with spacing location adjustments. Table 2306.1, this new table provides the standards that can be used for allowable stress design for wood elements. 2308.5.9, this change specifies that a load-bearing wood stud cannot be cut or notched more than 25% of its depth, and a partition wall can be up to 40%. 2308.5.10, this change specifies that the diameter of bored holes and load-bearing studs cannot be more than 40% of its depth. A partition wall can be up to 60%. Table 2308.7.2, this is a new table that provides adjustment factors to rafter spans. Table 2308.7.3.1. This table was updated with new data for rafter tie connections. And lastly, table 2308.7.3.1. Helo joint connection adjustment factors. This is a new table that provides adjustment factors for helo joints. And that concludes the chapters. Any questions?
I got a question on that board hold, 2308.5.10 board holes. Is there anything in there that talks, so they say 40% versus in a regular notch, they only allow 25%, but in a board hole, they allow 40%? Do they have a requirement for, it has to be in the middle?
Yes, I didn't put that in there. It's listed in that section. I believe it's 5/8 of an inch.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got to be somewhat centered in the stud, and it's part of that. I didn't list out the whole paragraph, but yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
1807.2.4, segmental retaining wall. I don't know what they mean by segmental. Is it done with joints, maybe? It says dry cast concrete unit used in the construction of segmental retaining walls shall comply with that standard. We've had issues with just the regular old retaining block walls. Even short ones I've seen start tipping out, are only like 3 feet tall. We've had some 8 feet used as retaining walls. Permits required over 4. That doesn't say engineering. They're assuming, we assume somebody is doing some calculation in the background on this retaining wall. You know, the size of the block, the weight, the pressures. And we've had movement on some near parking where we had to order the parking not used. And so I'm wondering what that means, dry cast concrete units. Is that those standard retaining wall blocks? It seems like that is what they're talking about.
Yeah, I believe that's what they're talking about. That would fall under what you're saying there.
And that's, I like it that there's a standard, if that whole section is new, that we have something to refer to on any kind of stacked stone retaining walls.
Yeah, and I know personally we don't really get into the design of these retaining walls, but I know a lot of times civil engineers will usually have these types of walls on their drawings. A lot of times they use, what is it, some type of geofabric that ties to the retaining wall and goes a certain distance out. But yeah, it's something that should be engineered when you get over 4 feet, because that's a lot of
The one I'm
pressure.
thinking about was, I believe it was 7 or 8 feet tall. And there was parking right at the bottom. And there was movement. And the retaining wall attached to the building, where it was adjacent, it started moving. The concrete, the washout was coming in. The concrete was getting undercut underneath the building. Patio decks, and it wasn't good. So it's good that there's a standard in there we can point to. I just don't know what the segmental, that means, stacked stone.
Yeah, that's how I took it as, is exactly what you're saying with the retaining wall blocks. That's not something that's actually mortared in or grouted.
Yeah, it was always a question to me before. Thanks.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Justin. All right, where are we at? Chapter 24, and appendices. Luke Olson.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Luke Olson with the City of Fargo Building Inspections Department. And I will be going through the 2021 IBC Code Review of chapters 24 through 33. I'll be skipping the, in my opinion, insignificant changes. There's several clarification changes and standard reference changes, and a few things that aren't typically constructed that way in our region. So I'll be skipping all of chapter 24, the glass and glazing chapter. It was mostly clarification, changes. Chapter 25, I will also be skipping gypsum board, gypsum panel products, and plaster. Chapter 26, I will also be skipping. It's plastic. Very minimal changes in there. Chapter 27, electrical, I'll be skipping that as well. Jumping into chapter 29, plumbing systems. Starting on page 29-1, we will be maintaining the amendment for section 2901.1. It's hereby amended to read as follows. The provision of this chapter and the North Dakota State Plumbing Code shall govern the design, construction, erection, and installation of plumbing components, appliances, equipment, and systems used in buildings and structures covered by this code. Toilet and bathing rooms shall be constructed in accordance with section 1209. Private sewage disposal systems shall conform to the North Dakota State Plumbing Code, the International Fire Code, and the International Property Maintenance Code. And the North Dakota State Plumbing Code shall govern the use and maintenance of plumbing components, appliances, equipment, and systems. The International Existing Building Code and the North Dakota State Plumbing Code shall govern the alteration, repair, relocation, replacement, and addition of plumbing components, appliances, equipment, and systems. And the rest of that sentence was struck out.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Who reviews the North Dakota State Plumbing Code?
The North Dakota State Plumbing Board.
Okay.
And they're the adopting body for the state of North Dakota. Gets a little different. City of Fargo adopts the building code and the mechanical codes, the fuel gas and the mechanical code. State of North Dakota adopts the electrical code and the plumbing code. And just because we're large enough to have our own inspectors and hire our own, we do the same thing once they've done it. So you kind of need to be involved in the state if you're gonna be involved in the electric or the plumbing code.
Okay.
We do review it. The UPC, they still adopt the Uniform Plumbing Code. We've been making attempts to influence adopting the IPC, but I don't know what the issue is, but there's a lot of objection to that at the state of Minnesota and the state of North Dakota level to adopting the IPC. We hear arguments both sides with cost implications on one or the other. So, state of North Dakota.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
Moving on to page, well, still on the same page, 29-1, section 2902.1.1, fixture calculations. 2 exceptions were added. The first, reads, where multiple user facilities are designed to serve all genders, the minimum fixture count shall be calculated 100% based on the total occupant load. In such multiple user facilities, each fixture type shall be in accordance with ICC A117.1, and each urinal that is provided shall be located in a stall. The next exception added, distribution of the sexes is not required where single-user water closets and bathing room facilities are provided in accordance with section 2902.1.2. These changes or clarifications were implemented to address gender and equality of access to required plumbing facilities. In single-user facilities, the requirement for lavatories and water closets is that you need 1 lavatory per water closet in a single-user facility. Staying on the same page, the next section is 2902.
Luke?
Sorry.
I was just gonna stop for a second to see if the board understands the implications
I have a
of that
question.
section he just read.
I have a question about the second paragraph there. in single-user facilities, a requirement for laboratories and water closets that you need one laboratory per water closet in a single-user facility. So if we have in an e-occupancy where we're seeing a lot of this type of toilet facility where we have individual water closets, private toilet facilities with congregate hand washing that is available to everybody. Is the intent of that when you're talking about single-user facilities, are you talking about a single water closet that's in a toilet room somewhere in the building, standalone, is required to have a laboratory, which makes total sense? Or are you talking about this grouped
No,
single-user? Okay, because it's a little bit unclear in the language there, because it says single-user twice. It says multiple user, but then it says single user, and it doesn't really define what single user is.
I believe that, I mean, that's how I read it as far as the intent was for the single user to be standalone and
Okay,
like you mentioned.
okay. So when they're saying multiple user facilities, they're talking about multiple user private stall, non-gendered facilities, or what
no,
are they?
that's the reason I stopped. I think it's almost like we should read this again so you get the true intent of that first paragraph.
Okay,
The second paragraph, it does have the word facilities in there, in single-user facilities.
okay,
So that's implying a room, in our
Okay.
opinion, one room, a single-user room, single-user facility. It's just saying you gotta have a lab if you have a water closet. You can't just have a water closet.
right.
Now, the top paragraph, though, has bigger implications. And where multiple user facilities are designed to serve all genders. This is the allowance, bring the multiple gender toilet rooms into all facilities. And back in the 18 adoption, they knew this was coming. We saw it in 20, and they actually drew pictures in very large buildings, one bathroom, all users going into one room. That's this one, yeah, no, that's the implication of that section.
Yeah, I understand that, and
Yeah.
I mean, we're doing it all the time in e-occupancies,
Okay.
and,
It's done a little different though, like you said, with the lab.
right,
You'll send them into another space. or
Right.
something like that. But now it's allowing everything in one room.
and in Minnesota, they've even taken it one step further, because these are everywhere now in e-occupancies, they're requiring one of the stalls in a multiple user private toilet stall situation like that to have a lab in the room in case you have somebody that needs to be able to clean themselves, whether they have, a colostomy bag or whatever, to be able to go into a private stall and use a sink in that private stall within the context of that larger one. I know that's not in here, but it's seemed like a good idea, in that they've written into the Minnesota State Building Code. So I think this is a really good idea to include this, and it provides some clarification because clients are asking for it for a lot of reasons that go beyond gender equity reasons. I mean, just from a security and safety and control of space standpoint, they really like this approach. So I'm glad it's in there.
The next section will be about similar references here. 2902.1.2, single-user toilet and bathing room facilities. They cleaned up the wording from 2018. They added the wording, the total number of fixtures shall be permitted to be based on the required number of separate facilities or based on the aggregate or any combination of single-user or separate facilities. Section 2902.2, separate facilities added exception 5 and 6. Exception number 5 states separate facilities shall not be required to be designed by sex or designated by sex, where single-user toilet rooms are provided in accordance with section 2902.1.2. In exception 6, separate facilities shall not be required where rooms having both water closets and lavatory fixtures are designed for use by both sexes and privacy for water closets are installed in accordance with section 405.3.4 of the International Plumbing Code. Urinals shall be located in an area visually separated from the remainder of the facility, where each urinal that is provided shall be located in a stall. In the single-user facilities, the requirement for lavatories and water closets is that you need one lavatory per water closet in a single-user facility. A designer could provide all the required plumbing fixtures in the form of single-user toilet rooms that could be identified to indicate availability with no requirement from the user's gender. Moving on to page 29-5. Section 2902.3.3, location of toilet facilities and occupancies other than malls. 2 exceptions were added. The first being the location and maximum distances of travel to required employee facilities and factory and industrial occupancies shall be permitted to exceed that required by this section, provided that the location and maximum travel distance are approved. Second exception, the location and maximum distances of travel to required public and employee facilities and Group S occupancies shall be permitted to exceed that required by this section, provided that the location and maximum distances of travel are approved. The location and travel distance is no longer required for employee toilet facilities and Group S storage occupancies where approved by the building official. They had in mind large warehouses, parking garages with attendants, self-storage facilities. Historically, this has been applied to Group F occupancies, so they broadened it to the S's. Moving on to Chapter 30, Elevators and Conveyance Systems. On page 30-1, Section 3001.2, Emergency Elevator Communication Systems for the deaf, hard of hearing, and speech impaired. Some wording was added. The system shall provide visible text and audible note modes that meet all the following requirements. The first one, when operating in each mode, including a live interactive system that allows back and forth conversation between the elevator occupants and emergency personnel. The second is operational when the elevator is operational. The third is allows elevator occupants to select text-based or audible mode depending on the communication needs to interact with emergency personnel. Moving on to Chapter 31, Special Construction. Page 31-6, Public Use Restroom Buildings and Flood Hazard Areas. It's a new section. It allows public use restrooms within designated flood hazard areas of publicly owned lands, able to have restrooms located at or above grade height, but below base flood elevation. There is some stipulations to that. The building footprint cannot exceed 1,500 square feet. It has to be located, designed, and constructed to resist the effects of flood hazards and flood loads to minimize flood damage from a combination of wind, water loads associated with base flood. Must be anchored to prevent flotation, collapse, or lateral movement resulting from hydrodynamic and hydrostatic loads, including the effects of buoyancy during conditions of the base flood, and constructed of flood damage resistant materials. Moving on to page 31-6, section 3115. Intermodal shipping containers. The IBC is now recognized as shipping containers for use in buildings and structures. The goal was to address minimum safety requirements without duplicating existing code provisions. Nature of occupancy that can occur in the shipping containers is defined in Table 1604.5, Risk Category 1. Building and other structures that represent a low hazard to human life in the event of a failure, including but not limited to agricultural facilities, certain temporary facilities, minor storage facilities. These structures need to be located a minimum of 8 feet from adjacent structures and are not connected to fuel gas systems or fuel gas utility. They also added a definition of intermodal shipping containers. which is a 6-sided steel unit originally constructed as a general cargo container used for the transport of goods and materials. Moving on to chapter 33 for safeguards during construction. We are removing a previously amended section 3313. It was previously amended. We're going to, I guess, I don't know how to say it, remove the previous amendment and continue to adopt it as the IBC states. Is that how you say it? It's currently on page 33-4, section 3313, water supply for fire protection. This section was very vague and 3 sentences long. Now it addresses building construction type, height, and distances from property lines. 3313.2, combustible building materials. When combustible building materials of the building under construction are delivered to a site, a minimum fire flow of 500 gallons per minute shall be provided. The fire hydrant used to provide this fire flow shall be within 500 feet of the combustible building materials as measured along the approved fire apparatus access lane. Where the site configuration is such that one fire hydrant cannot be located within 500 feet of all combustible materials, additional fire hydrants shall be required to provide coverage in accordance with this section.
A question? Fire department's here, right? Is the 500 feet, is that an acceptable distance for you guys?
Yeah, so this section was kind of in the code last year. Like Luke said, a lot less requirements with it. It was amended out of the building code, and we actually hadn't amended it out of the fire code, so we probably didn't coordinate the best on that one. As far as the provisions, though, you know, within the city of Fargo, when you want to develop, the process itself kind of inherently requires that fire hydrants are there. We don't allow development to occur in parts of the town that haven't already gone through plating and development process, and so the whole layout of the streets should be there. The hydrants should be in place. Really, the only time I could see this coming into play is where we've issued early building permits, and that has to be fully coordinated between inspections and the engineering department. So even then, we're coming up with a system to allow that to be in play. You know, so we can work with the 500-foot requirement, but I don't see too many times where we'll actually even be having to look at that, because in most cases, your lot is ready for development, and we've already got a lot of that in place, so.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes my review. Are there any questions at all? Additional questions? Thank you all very much for your time.
Okay, thanks, Luke. May as well keep it rolling. Item C on the agenda, review International Property Maintenance Code. Bill Yates to present.
Good morning. I'm Bill Yates. I'm a rental housing inspector at the city of Fargo. And I'm presenting the 2021 International Property Maintenance Code Review. There are no significant changes to this book between the 18 and the 21. So I'm just going to go through, we're keeping the same amendments that we had in the 18 code. So in section 101.1, it's the title. We just added City of Fargo as the name of the jurisdiction. Section 102.3, application of other codes. All the other codes are listed individually. We struck that out and we just added the sentence, all applicable ordinances adopted by the City of Fargo. Section 104.1, fees. This is the only change that we have. And the fees have always been $100 after the first reinspection. And we thought it was time to raise that to $150 because they've been $100 for so many years. .1 membership of the board. That got changed from not less than 3 to 5 members. Terms defined in other codes. We removed International Plumbing Code and International Zoning Code. And then it reads, throughout this code, whenever reference is made to the International Plumbing Code, it should be taken to mean the North Dakota State Plumbing Code. And whenever reference is made to the NFPA 70, it shall mean the National Electric Code. And then we have some fill in the blank sections. 302.4 weeds. We added as provided by city ordinance, and we took out, the way it reads in the book is you have to insert the inches for weeds, but it's in our ordinance. Insect screens, we just added dates when they're required and when we enforce insect screens. Heat supply, we added the dates when property owners are required to provide heat and when we enforce heat. And the same for occupiable workspaces. And then 703.7 was deleted in its entirety, just because that's what it was in the 18 code also. There were a few changes in the book, and the only thing is there are a few code sections that were merged together, some were separated, and some, like the Board of Appeals stuff, was moved to the back of the book. So sections are moved, but the intent stayed the same. The way we enforced these sections stayed the same. So that's all I really have, unless you guys have some questions for me.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks. Any, in terms of new business, do we act on this? I don't remember what we did last time, but there's no action required. And on to staff reports.
Yeah, I apologize for not being at the first meeting to do the basic introduction, so I don't know exactly everything that was said at that meeting. Maybe I'll reiterate that we're going to go along and do all these meetings for the code adoption. And at any time, anybody can bring anything up. We'll track the issues that come up that need further attention. And by the last meeting, we should have taken care of all of those. So at any time along the way, if you have notes, you can bring up those issues again if you like, and we'll respond in any way we need to. I'll reiterate that the board makes the final adoption of the code to the city commission. So we're just here as recommenders. We publish the meetings. The citizens can come, architects, contractors, engineers, everybody can come and state any of their opinions on any of the codes. So, but you just absorb all that and take that final, make a recommendation, which we'll provide at the last meeting to give to the city commission for adoption of the code. That's all I have to say. Anything, Ryan? Okay. I was just gonna ask, Justin, going back to intermodal shipping containers, what do you think about that?
What do I think about it?
Well, have you ever had to review one? There was one that was used, I remember about 15 years ago, somebody placed one out by the river and had a remote control car racetrack thing, and it was a club, but they laddered them up to the upper level, and I required an engineering analysis on this steel box. It ended up being okay. So I'm just wondering, they're coming into play more often. Some people have placed them without our knowledge, and there's some visible out even from the street. We're starting to see them, I'm told from some inspectors, in rear yards of storage containers. You know, with the price of building materials, they were a lot cheaper to put out there. And there were companies that were placing them for rent or for storage. So I'm just wondering, now they're in the code. There should be standards for them. But we'll probably request, even when we get requests for them, to have an engineer look at them.
Yeah, I did a house out in Minot that used them. I had 4 or 5 of them. They stacked in like a 2-story building with them and made some modifications that we had to do engineering on. And I think one actually in town here, we had one, a restaurant or a bar in town wanted to use one for like an outdoor patio, make some modifications. So
what I've seen with them, they can take a lot of load, but when you start making modifications to them, like cutting the openings in, that's where you probably need the engineering, because you can't just go cut a 8-foot hole in it. Without any holes in it, the things can take a lot of load, much more than any snow loads or wind loads we see in this area. But when they start doing those modifications, then it's pretty important to get it checked out.
We're renovating the Sam's Club over in Moorhead for the new career academy, and that building, and my understanding is this is something that Sam's does in their buildings all over the place, had a prefabricated electrical room where they completely built out the electrical room inside of a shipping container. They cut the ceiling out of it entirely, and then they just brought it in and set it in the room. And so it provided their enclosure within a larger space for their electrical room with no ceiling in it. And apparently that's part of their design standard, was doing this prefabricated electrical room. And so we've just left it that way in that project, but kind of an interesting use of a shipping container.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Sanford Hospital, they did most of the patient rooms that way. I mean, it's more conventional steel frame construction, but similar. Bottom in, set them in. All right, thank you.
I know they make a great beer cooler. Cracker. Other than that,
That's all we have. Thanks.
all right. Anything else from the board? Otherwise, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion is second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.